skepticism about Timmy C playing Bob Dylan. Maybe a little less now that the nominations and the wins are starting to roll in. He's incredible. But, at first, Bob Dylan has kind of become a caricature himself. He's very withdrawn these days from the public eye. And so he's just kind of a memory. When I told someone I was going to this screening, they did the voice in a comedic way. And sure enough, when Timothee Chalamet speaks for the first time in the film as Bob Dylan, he does the voice. And my audience laughed. And they laughed again and again. However, something very interesting happened. As this quirky young man earnestly made his way to see his hero, Woody Guthrie, who was in the hospital, and as he won over Woody, and he won over Pete Seeger in the first few minutes of the film, he also won over the audience. That is great filmmaking right there. That's because it's very clever writing and directing and even producing, because Timothée Chalamet, by the way, is one of the producers on this film. But they know that this is a hurdle. So they construct the film that what's happening in the film happens with the audience as well. You're meant to laugh at Timothée Chalamet as Bob Dylan at first, just as Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger do. But just like them, it doesn't take long for you to start taking this young man very seriously and to think, what a talent. Speaking of what a talent, Timothée Chalamet. As you watch his performance, you can really tell that he has a vision, not just for his role, but for the overall film, which again, as I said, he's a producer on. And he actually pulls it off. That's really amazing. For an artist so young to have such command, not just of his own performance, but for the film around him. That is rare and impressive. So yes, Bob Dylan was and is odd, here and in real life. And I think there's a really interesting bit of dialogue in the movie that speaks to that. About Bob Dylan has this feeling that his theory is that you have to be a little bit of a freak to hold people's attention. I thought that was a very interesting and unique take on celebrity. This movie's very interesting. It really wears its business hat. I love me some business talk. And on that note, we've discussed before, Will Smith, when he was building his own career, he very much studied the box office returns of other films, and that helped him to choose the projects that he would be in to build a successful career with these big box office hits. And so I was so fascinated to see that Bob Dylan kind of to some degree did the same thing, that he very much put his business hat on in terms of building his career. And, sometimes we get into arguments a little bit, well, some of us do, about how important business is to the art of film. And you can see, particularly an artist like Bob Dylan, that he was so business-minded as well. I mean, it shouldn't overtake the art, but you're really misleading yourself and lying to yourself if you don't acknowledge that art, creativity, and business are hand in hand in anything that is a business, the film industry, the music industry, etc. So yes, Bob Dylan was a complete unknown, which is a famous lyric from one of his own songs, Like a Rolling Stone. However, the movie makes it clear that the entertainment business, speaking of these businesses, like many of them, is a business of relationships. And Dylan actively sought out relationships that he knew or thought would help and gambled on that would help his career. And in some cases, he abused those relationships. Now, I wouldn't say that Bob Dylan was or is a mean person, but I would say he's clearly an extremely ambitious person. And when you add to that he's clearly antisocial and has a very high opinion of himself, those characteristics are very self-serving to someone who's ambitious. And that was interesting to see. And that was very interesting to see. But he does have one friend, Mr. Johnny Cash. And it's very funny to see director and co-writer James Mangold go full circle because, of course, almost 20 years ago, he had another Oscar-nominated and it turns out winning film with the Johnny Cash bio, Walk the Line. Interestingly, neither Joaquin Phoenix nor Boyd Holbrook, that's Boyd Holbrook, we're going to talk about it, but none of them really look like Johnny Cash, who here and in many, also Walk the Line and other times that he's interpreted, he's portrayed as a cool kid. But in reality, you can see he has that same, maybe it's a little bit slighter, but that freak quality that Dylan speaks to, which I think is fascinating. I think it's almost a disservice to Johnny Cash to present him as the cool kid, because you therefore don't portray, I think, what was a part of what made him so captivating and captured the interest of audiences. But maybe he's portrayed that way here because he was a hero to Dylan, and probably one of the only people that Dylan genuinely admired and respected, which again is very interesting. Now, they have several conversations throughout the film about celebrity, and Dylan makes a lot of his own comments on it. And they're amazing. I don't want to give any of them away, but they're just like, they're sprinkled throughout the script. It's one of the reasons that I, as a Critics' Choice member, nominated this film for best adapted screenplay. It's based on a book, because it has some lines that are just fantastic. For self-serving purposes, Hollywood usually only portrays being a celebrity as fun, or they go at the obvious dangers like substance abuse, changing people for the worse, or they lose all their money. But in A Complete Unknown, the film does an excellent job of depicting the isolation of fame. And that is something that is not self-inflicted very often. And then also the pressures that are there, not just from fans and from the suits, but also from one's peers. That, you don't exist in a vacuum. Again, you're in an industry. And that's all very, very, very interesting. The business hat side of me was like blown away by this movie. So yes, that is Boyd Holbrook. Can you believe it? He looks totally different. He looks good, but he looks totally different. And he is a wonderful Johnny Cash. When I was watching the movie, I was like, who is that? I sensed somebody I know inside there. And so only afterwards, I never got it while I was watching the movie, but I looked it up afterwards and I was like, hot damn, I can't believe that's Boyd Holbrook. All right, so the film has a plethora of amazing supporting performances, because again, Bob Dylan might have liked to stand alone, but he certainly did not build his career alone. He took advantage of a lot of people. All right, so Edward Norton is getting all the attention for Pete Seeger, a role that is surprisingly small for all the attention that it's getting. But it's a very heartfelt and, again, as I said, nuanced performance, and a sad performance. It was Bob Dylan's peers were at first thrilled that he was putting folk music on the map in a way that had never been before. But then I think they started to wonder why they couldn't do it, and then also perhaps Dylan was becoming too powerful within the space. All interesting questions. So a lot of that within Pete Seeger, that's a lot of conflicting emotions that he feels very guilty about. And I think that swirling storm is captured very nicely in Edward Norton's performance. Monica Barbaro is also getting some attention for her role as Joan Baez. She actually looks a lot like Emma Stone here. In fact, when she first shows up in the movie, I was like, surprise Emma Stone cameo? And then I was like, oh no, that's somebody else. Barbaro, she's fantastic here. She does a great job. And it's exciting to see her in a role that's so big, where she can actually do stuff. Because, I think the biggest role she's had to date is one of the pilots in Top Gun Maverick. But it's a pretty standard woman gets steamrolled by an ambitious man scenario. Same with Elle Fanning's role as the other woman in Bob Dylan's life at the time. They both do a great job. They really do a great job. But the roles are not exciting and new. You're like, again, as I said, pretty standard stuff. As for the time period, I don't like bios that only cover like a week in the life of somebody. I prefer full life. This isn't full life. This is 1961 to 1965. It's just enough, I think, to really paint a compelling picture about. I think you get a good look at Bob Dylan with this movie, to be honest with you. And it makes you want to go and see what else happened to him. But it's very interesting. Maybe in a couple of years, a lot of years, Timmy C can revisit the role and tell the second half of Bob Dylan's life. Okay, so speaking of stereotypical roles, Dan Fogler, I love him. He has a very stereotypical role as Bob Dylan's manager. All the bells and whistles that you would expect. But again, he does a very nice job. Now, as for some of the more creative performances and more creative roles, there's Holbrook, as I said, who steals his scenes as Johnny Cash. Norbert, he comes in as this almost ethereal being who you'll see it. It's really good. Norbert Leo Butz, big Broadway guy, fantastic as Alan Lomax, a major player on the folk scene at that time, and let's just say a folk music purist. That he has some great stuff. Again, I don't want to spoil it, but it was great role. Also, Charlie Tahan was in here, just briefly. But I really enjoyed him not only on Ozark, but in Gotham. So the fact that he's still getting work, that he's still in it, made me very happy. But then also, I am shocked that Scoot McNairy isn't getting more attention as Woody Guthrie. I mean, it's a very small role, but he has some of the most compelling and moving scenes in the film. He made me cry. That was amazing. All right, now let's talk Timmy C. All right, he just becomes Bob Dylan. Interestingly, he worked with the same vocal coach that Austin Butler did with Elvis. However, I think with Elvis, there was so much flourish to Baz Luhrmann's directing style that you couldn't really connect with the artistry of what Austin Butler was doing. You could at some points, and I think that's when the movie actually was at its best. Here, though, James Mangold just gets out of Timmy C's way. He just lets him act. And he not only gets the voice right, but he gets Bob Dylan's well-known mannerisms correct. And I think Timmy C was very smart to choose Bob Dylan because I think there's already some crossover there in terms of their physicality. He cast himself well. A lot of actors don't do that. A lot of actors don't have an honest, realistic depiction of who they actually are. And sometimes that leads them to making very poor decisions for what roles they take on. I think Timmy C is very aware, and I think it serves him well here. And one of the things that impressed me the most about his performance is his energy. Because, so far, I've seen Timmy C in a lot of stuff. And for the most part, he's played good guys, or at least guys with good intentions up until now. But here, to see him play someone so morally ambiguous, who's also extremely ambitious, and then here's the kicker, on that note, to see an ambitious person go from being ambitious to realizing those ambitions. Oh my gosh! And to see that physicality in Chalamet's performance just blew me away. Now, after Wonka, we all know he can sing. By the way, side note, Chalamet is only 28, and he already has 3 really big leading roles under his belt, and they're all very different, which is showing tremendous range. So also, here's something else. No comic book movies. He's so far resisted the comic book film. Can he actually get away with it? Can he actually build a career without going down that road? And you know who that reminds me of? Leonardo DiCaprio. Now, I've always talked about the fact that a lot of actors throughout the history of Hollywood always look to the previous generation to an actor that they can kind of follow in their footsteps. And we all thought that Robert Pattinson was doing the Leonardo DiCaprio and that Timothee Chalamet was doing the Johnny Depp. But I think it might actually be the opposite. I think Pattinson's doing Depp and Chalamet's doing DiCaprio. I love it. I think actually that's it. I think we cracked it. That really, I think, better describes both of them. And so yes, Timmy C can sing. Oh boy, can he sing. And he recreates some of Bob Dylan's most famous songs so perfectly that you would swear they were the original tracks. It's nuts. I don't think that Austin Butler ever sang any of Elvis's songs all the way through that I can recall. But Timmy C, also because maybe the nature of folk music, you just stand there and sing. He really does the whole song. And it's so fun to see Chalamet's Dylan step up to the mic because, he's just creating and writing and performing these songs for the first time, being like, what do you think of this one? And it's an absolute banger. I love this stuff. It's like, I'm from the future, Bob Dylan. That's a huge hit. Zack Snyder's going to use it in all of his trailers. I mean, it's just fantastic. It was so fun. And then to see the audience and the industry backstage just go crazy. They're like, that's amazing. And you're like, it is. That was really a big part of what was so fun about the film. Although it also highlights the fact that there aren't a lot of musicians and singers today who have something to say. And it's certainly not for lack of material. There's a lot, this was the 1960s, so there was a lot of stuff happening, and there's certainly a lot of stuff happening today. But no one in the music space is saying anything, and I think that is a very sad reflection of where the music industry is right now. Not to say that the music industry is completely devoid of message, and sometimes it's, a lot of times the messaging isn't about politics or society, it's about things that are relatable, and that's good too. But why has no one stepped up into this space? A complete unknown just goes to show that in any format, people respond, not just to people who are a little bit of a freak, as Bob Dylan said, but people who have something to say genuinely and aren't afraid to say it. I actually think he reminds me a little bit of the podcast space in this movie. I thought that was very interesting. I will say that about 3/4 through the movie, I hit a wall and I just couldn't listen to any more folk music. I was like, I don't care how good it is. I'm out. I can't take it anymore. I'm not a folk music fan. I was like, So thankfully, the film itself almost realizes this, and it doesn't overstay its welcome. It has a lot of singing in it, for sure. But at 2 hours and 21 minutes, don't worry, a lot of that is story. I would say it's, in fact, maybe 50-50 or maybe 60-40, leaning in the story direction. So there's Elvis, the iconic Bohemian Rhapsody. Now this film, we're getting a pretty good set of music bios here, and we'll see if the upcoming Michael Jackson one can join this group. It's too bad the Whitney Houston bio wasn't more cinematic. It was actually pretty good, but it felt like a TV movie. There's, of course, Selena, La Vie en Rose, Judy, but that was more of a character study, and that was one of those, like a week in the life of, so I'm not a huge fan of those. That was more about the actor than the, it's fine if it's about both, but I think that was more about Renee Zellweger than Judy Garland, in my opinion. But we don't have, we're getting a good run of, movies about male musicians. I wish there were more about female singers, famous singers. Thank goodness for Tina Turner's bio, What's Love Got to Do with It, with, of course, the iconic Angela Bassett. James Mangold does a very nice job here, once again. And again, this is familiar territory to him after Walk the Line. He's not a highly artistic director. He doesn't have a lot of flair, but he really knows how to deliver a very solid, slick film, like a really nice package that feels cinematic. That a movie that deserves to be seen in theaters, and that's more important these days than ever. So that's very much to James Mangold's credit. He also shines here as a co-writer, working with Jay Cox, who has long worked with Scorsese. That's what he's done mostly as a writer. And this, as I said, is based on a recent book. And the script, again, is very, very strong. And it manages to really shine a light not just on Dylan, his songs, and the man, but also the folk music scene at the time, and the people who are key players in that scene and in Bob Dylan's life. That is a lot. And the movie makes it seem totally effortless. The way they weave it all together, I think, is just very, very impressive. So that's my review of A Complete Unknown. Good old-fashioned and therefore timeless filmmaking. Really strong. And a respectful, but also honest depiction of Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan actually tweeted about it. And I loved his interaction with Timothee Chalamet. Timothee Chalamet was very gracious about it. But I wondered if Bob Dylan would embrace this movie because it's not the most flattering. But I think maybe, again, just like Timmy C knows who he is, I guess maybe Bob Dylan knows who he is. And again, I think this movie is respectful, but doesn't flinch away from the realities of who Bob Dylan is and how he got where he is. All right, so share your thoughts down below. Subscribe today. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.